you are ready to start.
All right. So good morning and welcome to the meeting of the campaign finance. The first item of business is the approval of the minutes of the meeting. I'll move the adoption or an approval of the minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. The next item of business is the chair's report. Here goes. Yesterday, we reached a significant milestone in our progress toward the city's municipal elections in 2021, as more than 200 candidates filed disclosures with the CFB. The disclosure filed to date will determine the public funds payments that campaigns are eligible to receive through New York City's landmark public campaign financing program. The matching funds program has been one of the largest and most successful in the country for more than 30 years. It has allowed more candidates and a more diverse pool of candidates to run real campaigns for city office by engaging with their neighbors for support. The program has meant that access to wealthy supporters is not a prerequisite for public service as an elected official in New York City. For the 2021 citywide elections, voters and lawmakers have made public campaign funds even more accessible to everyday New Yorkers running for office. We have increased the matching rate to 8-to-1 for small contributions, meaning that a $10 contribution can be worth $90 to the candidate. We also make the public funds available to campaigns earlier in the campaign cycle. The first payments in December will be made 6 months before the primary elections. There will be 5 additional payments and opportunities to qualify for payments made before the June primaries. These earlier public funds payments should allow candidates to build stronger campaigns that more effectively engage voters. CFB work diligently to make sure voters can elect a government that reflects the diversity, values, and priorities. I will now turn to Nancy Stammer for a report from CF Voter Assistance Advisory Committee.
Thank you, Chair Schaefer. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
The Voter Assistance Advisory Committee hosted a public hearing earlier this month to hear from New Yorkers about the issues they faced while casting ballots at the polls and by mail in the June primary election. Hundreds of concerned New Yorkers tuned in on Zoom and Facebook Live for the public hearing, as more than 70 New Yorkers submitted written testimony or testified during the hearing. Among the issues discussed were missing or undelivered absentee ballots, voters who did not receive the full ballot at the poll sites, confusion about how to cast the absentee ballot, and concern over whether the ballots will be counted. All of the testimony will be shared with the Board of Elections. More than 700,000 city voters requested mail-in ballots for the primary, a huge spike over previous elections. Roughly half of those ballots, more than 400,000, were returned to the Board of Elections. We have more work to do to help voters participate in the November election in the midst of an ongoing pandemic. The governor and state legislature have yet to extend universal voting by mail for the presidential election in November. We hope that they will do so when the legislature returns to session next week. Also, during the hearing, CFB staff presented an analysis that shows new voter registrations in New York City fell by nearly half in 2020 compared to 2016. Nearly 80,000 residents registered in the first 6 months of 2020, compared to over 155,000 who registered 4 years ago in the last presidential election year. Registration in January and February of this year indicated major enthusiasm, drawing 27% more new voters compared to the first 2 months of 2016. But COVID-19's arrival halted most, if not all, of the in-person voter registration efforts, which is how most New Yorkers still register to vote. The CFB developed an online voter registration platform in 2019 that city voters could begin using this fall with the approval of state leaders. New Yorkers deserve an online voter registration system that everyone can access so that all of our voices can be reflected at the polls in November. The coronavirus has changed so much of our lives, but it has not changed New Yorkers' desires to speak up and make their voices heard. It has not altered our desire and right to vote in our elections. We hope that next week, our state leaders will approve mail-in voting and online voter registration and provide New Yorkers with the tools and the time they need to vote in November. Thank you, and I will now turn to Amy Loprest for her report.
Thank you very much. I don't have much of a report, but I just wanted to commend the staff who have been working remotely and have, processed all of the over 200 disclosure statements that we received yesterday remotely for the first time. I also want to particularly call out our network administration staff who have been working tirelessly to keep all of the staff who are working remotely connected and our systems running efficiently. So thank you to the entire staff for working in these challenging environments.
Thank you, Amy. I just want to make sure I'm unmuted. Yes, you can hear me. Okay. The next item on the agenda is the announcement of 2017 campaigns in compliance. The following candidate from the 2017 elections has completed the penalties assessed by the Campaign Finance Board. The board recognizes the diligence of the candidate and her campaign staff in running a campaign that maintained compliance with New York City's campaign finance law. The candidate was Marjorie Velasquez. She was running for City Council District number 13, and she was a first-time candidate. The next item on our agenda are some appearances. Let me just get the agenda back up on my screen. We have two candidate appearances today, and the first is Costa Constantinidis. So let's proceed with that. Let's have our staff and Mr. Constantinidis and or his representative also check in.
Yes, good morning. My name is Bethany Persky, Deputy General Counsel for the CFB. Before the board is the matter of the Costa Constantinidis campaign for City Council District 22 in the 2017 general election. The candidate was a participant in the program and received $19,332 in public funds. CFB staff is recommending that the board find that the campaign committed the following violations and assess penalties according to the penalty guidelines. Failing to demonstrate compliance with cash receipts, reporting, and documentation requirements. Failing to document a transaction. Accepting contributions from corporations, limited liability companies, or partnerships. Failing to demonstrate that spending was in furtherance of the campaign, and making impermissible post-election expenditures. CFB staff is also recommending a public funds repayment based on a qualified expenditure deficit. The campaign contests the recommended violations and penalties and the public funds repayment.
Sure, Schaefer, you're muted again.
Who is appearing for Mr. Constantinidis?
Good morning. This is Ardian Tagani from PITA, and also with me is Vito Pitta and the campaign treasurer, Leah Carter.
Good morning. Mr. Tagani will be making the presentation on behalf of the campaign.
Concurred. Thank you. Good morning.
So, good morning, Chair Schaefer, Director Loprest, and members of the board. As stated by the Campaign Finance Board staff, the committee contests the staff's third, fourth, and fifth recommended violations and penalties, as well as the public funds repayment. The committee does not contest the first and second recommended penalties regarding cash receipt reporting and documentation requirements and documenting transactions. Regarding the third recommended violation penalty, the committee has not been able to contact either of the two entities referenced by CFB staff. The first, Tubbs Hub, ceased operating at some point following the November 2016 event. The committee has attempted to contact the owners, but has not been successful in this attempt to contact them and properly respond to the issue. As stated by the committee's response to the enforcement notice, Ted Corse contributed from his personal account and not a corporate account. Mr. Corse's reference to his employer on the contribution card was merely for the purpose of identification. Ms. Carter, the committee's treasurer, requested confirmation from Mr. Corse that the contribution was from a personal account and received an email on January 1st, 2019. This was attached as Exhibit 3 to the CFP's, to our response to the CFP's recommendations. Ms. Carter then requested a notarized statement from Mr. Corse, but was not able to receive that. He had not responded to any emails or calls. The contribution card does also include the signed statement, the attestation that the contribution was from his personal funds and not from a professional account. Regarding the fourth recommended violation penalty, the committee contests the determination that the bonus payments to Mrs. Carter were not in furtherance of the campaign. As stated by the board, board staff, the committee paid an $8,000 bonus to Mrs. Carter in relation to the primary election and a $1,000 bonus in relation to the general election. These bonus payments complied with the CFP rules then in place, including each of the criteria in the Rule 1-8P then in place. The payment was made during the election year before the general election. It was not duplicative of any service. It was campaign related by its nature. It was not unusually high as a of the funds or of a high overall dollar amount. There was no pattern of expenditures unrelated to the campaign, and the contract agreeing to the bonus payments was signed years in advance of the primary and general elections. The amount of the bonus was determined by the candidate, Mrs. Carter, and it reflected the quality of her work as treasurer, as evidenced by the candidate's victory in the 2017 campaign, as well as the additional duties taken on by her in this election cycle when compared to previous elections. The 2017 campaign took on fewer volunteers than previous campaigns, and that led to Mrs. Carter taking on a greater amount of the work. Primary election bonuses paid to Mrs. Carter only made up 10.2% of the payments to consultants paid by the campaign, and only 3.9% of the committee's overall expenses. And it reflects that Mrs. Carter continued to attend all campaign events and all fundraising events, taking a first-hand role in everything, even though she had moved out of the city at the time, and the campaign was a more significant burden on her in overall time and in travel expenses. Additionally, just before the date of the primary, the candidate had anticipated a challenge from an opponent who was eventually removed from the ballot just before the date of the primary election. While the CFP staff cites the current Rule 9.2C3, the Campaign Finance Board did not have occasion to provide guidance at the time of the 2017 election. Not only is the current Rule 9208C3 not controlling here, as stated by the staff, it shouldn't be instructive here, as this would be a retrospective analysis. The campaign couldn't have known at the time that they would be held to this new standard. When the contract was signed in 2014, it satisfied all the rules then in place. The rules at the time only made one reference to bonuses, and this was a prohibition of post-election expenditures in Rule 53E22, Roman 2. The handbook, in effect at the time, only referenced post-election bonuses not written in contract, and bonuses contingent on the receipt of public funds, and the $8,000 bonus doesn't match any of these prohibitions. The committee would like to also call attention to the fact that this contract was negotiated, drafted, and signed in 2014 before the committee had retained compliance counsel. It was drafted with a good faith effort to stay in compliance, and did in fact stay in substantial compliance with the rules at the time. And also, additionally, in response to the CFP staff reference to advisory opinion 2007-3, the committee would like to state that the payments to Mrs. Carter were made to her as an individual for her professional services that she had demonstrated a skill in providing. The absence of a corporate entity through which Mrs. Carter could have been paid shouldn't weigh against her being compensated for the quality of work or her additional responsibilities as treasurer. The Ms. Carter was hired by the committee based on her demonstrated ability, dating as far back as the 2009 cycle as a treasurer for campaigns. Yeah, even though the board shouldn't be guided by Rule 9(2)(c)(3), we would also like to state that should it consider to do so, then it should recognize that at least a portion of the bonus complies with that rule, as the total amount paid to Mrs. Carter was $40,000 to $40,200. Apologies. The permissible bonus amount would be $4,020, and the penalty on the remaining $3,980 would be $995. The committee doesn't have a further comment regarding the recommended violation and penalty in relation to Mrs. Sharon. Regarding the fifth recommended violation and penalty, the committee contests the recommended violation relating to eye contact. The committee was unable to provide any supporting documentation for the January 3rd, 2018 charge for eye contact, as no such documentation was produced. The committee utilized eye contact for sending emails related to fundraising and maintaining the account as part of winding down the campaign. The January 2018 payment was the final made to eye contact. Regarding the qualified expenditure deficit calculation and the public funds repayment recommendation, the committee contests this as it has provided sufficient documentation to qualify expenditures in excess of the repayment obligation. In responding to the CFB's enforcement notice, the committee obtained from its bank copies of 16 checks written to John Benjamin and Nick Rawlson, all related to transactions identified by staff as needing canceled check copies to qualify. The canceled check copies obtained by the bank all featured both sides of the check, and the committee included these as Exhibit K to its response to the CFB's enforcement notice. In November 2019, CFB staff sent an updated recommendation to the committee in advance of what would have been the committee's February 2020 appearance, and staff accepted 7 of the aforementioned checks, but did not accept the other 9. The staff stated these 9 checks did not include an endorsement. After the updated recommendations were received, Mrs. Carter contacted the payees and confirmed that each of these 9 checks was deposited by the payees via ATM without the payee endorsing the check. The checks can be found on bank statements previously submitted by the committee. John Benjamin and Nick Rawlson have each signed notarized statements explaining their use of ATMs to deposit the checks and confirming their receipt of the funds. Therefore, the committee believes it supplied sufficient evidence to qualify an additional $27,250 in expenses.
So, I have a question for the campaign for Ms. Persky. A couple questions. One, in terms of the Ted Chorus, the corporate, what more actually could the campaign do? In other words, they've gotten confirmation from an email. It's not every person who you interact with is going to be willing to then say, oh, you mean for $100 now you want me to go to the trouble of getting a notarized statement? It seems that there was not, the campaign has done whatever it could do, so that it seems, I have a question about in new circumstances penalizing. That's question number 1 I'd like to address. The question number 2 is, I'm confused, and maybe this isn't being contested, is if we say that post-election expenditures, you can't pay a bonus post-election, how do you ever pay a bonus for a result of an election? It seems that catch-22. And I guess the last one I'd like you to address is comment that on the bank statements you will see the actual odds of those remaining checks.
So first, regarding the chorus contribution, it's simply our documentation standard that an email is not sufficient, and so there needs to be either a sworn statement or a refund to prove the origin of the funds. And again, this is because of the information listed on the contribution card. If there were no other indication that it was a corporate contribution, of course, just the contribution card on its face would be sufficient in that signed affirmation. But under these circumstances, we do require a notarized statement. To your second question, yeah, win bonuses are not permitted because post-election bonuses are not permitted. And our standard is that a bonus needs to be based on quantifiable merit-based criteria. So for example, you made X number of phone calls, you solicited Y number of contributions, something that is measurable and could be measured prior to the actual date of the election.
Is that standard in effect at the time, 1, and 2, if it's permissible to have a bonus linked to winning an election, how could you not pay that after the election?
Again, I would argue that it's not permissible. If you've received public funds, it's not permissible to pay a bonus based on winning the election, because by definition, as you say, it would have to be made after the election.
The rules then provided, and do they even now provide that? That seems like a pretty
I'm sorry. The rule at the time provided that post-election bonuses were not permitted for campaigns that received public funds. And so by definition, as you say, by inference, a win bonus would be prohibited. It did not provide, as you say, the 902c3 criteria are new in terms of the quantifiable merit-based criteria. But we did require, just as a standard, as we do with all payments under contracts, that the amount and the rate of calculation be clearly explained in the contract. It's not just a sum total, it's how that rate of pay was arrived at, particularly in a case like this where the $8,000 is wildly disproportionate to the employee's monthly pay rate. And I think it's important to separate. This $8,000 was for the primary election only. There was a separate $1,000 bonus for the general election, which was the election in which the candidate was contested. He was not contested in the primary. So this was an uncontested rate, an uncontested race, for which the bonus payment constituted 19% of the employee's total pay and exceeded her monthly rate by somewhere between $7,000 and $7,300. So it's really the amount of the bonus and the fact that the rate by which that bonus was calculated was not spelled out in the contract and has not subsequently been spelled out at any point by the campaign.
I'd like to follow up on that last point. Suppose the amount, in your view, was not disproportionate. Let's say it was 10% instead of 20%. Would you still be arguing that it should be disallowed because the contract does not provide enough detail as to how the amount is to be determined?
We would. That would still be one of our standards, that contracts need to provide detail as to how rate of pay, including any bonus, is calculated. Under AO 2007-3, the amount and the disproportionate amount when compared to the monthly rate is another factor that weighs on the problematic nature of this bonus in particular, but for any bonus, it would need to be spelled out in the contract.
Any other questions? Is there any further presentation that the campaign or the CFB representative wishes to make?
So I apologize. Mr. Davis asked a third question and you were cutting out a little bit. I wasn't able to hear it.
The third question was related to the statement that for the checks that you didn't accept, that if you looked at the bank statements that you do have, it shows that those checks were in fact cashed.
So I can let our auditor, Donna Ross, speak in more detail on that, but I will say that seeing on the bank statement that the check was cashed is not dispositive because we required the endorsement in order to show that it was cashed by the payee.
So just to respond to that immediately, then the other comments, the checks were not endorsed by the person, the payee, when they deposited. They simply put it into the ATM to deposit, and this shouldn't be held against the committee when the payee is the one who determines how to check, and the bank had clearly checked it. It had been taken out of the committee's funds. Additionally, one of the checks, while it doesn't have a signature on it, it does show a piece of a printing. It seems to be that the scan from the bank did not include all of its all of the numbers, but there is on check 1156, John Benjamin's payment of $3,500. There is a partial serial code printed on the backside that matches what other checks had printed from the bank to show Additionally, we have notarized statements from the payees confirming that they had received the funding, and we had the contracts from the payees. All of this was in the records of the contract is in the records of the CFP staff. The notarized statements were produced in advance of the appearance. Regarding the Ted Chorus, the campaign has the signed attestation. Mr. Chorus, from what it seems on the contribution card, simply wrote his employee to identify who he was. It's the same as, later in that same contribution card, his employer is listed there as well. It's just a matter of him putting it beside his name off to the right. And regarding the bonus, the $8,000 payment was made in advance of the general election, and it wasn't a post-election expenditure. The election, they paid the bonus of $1,000 was paid on the election day. The $8,000 bonus was made previous to the actual date of the election, and the campaign didn't know it wouldn't have a contested election until the actual date of the primary. It went into primary day just before the primary. The the Board of Elections had removed the opponent from the ballot, and that eventually ended up running as a drop-in candidate in general.
Could you clarify exactly how long before the election the primary challenger was removed from the ballot?
I could not identify in the Board of Elections data, but I think Leah would be able to explain more. I believe it was within a few days, maybe within a week or two. Leah, she's on the call right now. I think she might be muted or able to unmute.
Good morning. I honestly do not remember the exact date, but we had run the campaign during the primary portion of it upon the fact that we were having a contested race, and that's going to continue to proceed. I believe it was within, as Artie had mentioned, within a week or two of the actual primary date that we finally received notification from the Board of Elections, or had found out from elections, that the opposing candidate was dropped due to issues with his petitions.
I can clarify that the bonus payment was made on August 12th, which was a month before the September 12th primary. And the campaign had previously stated that the timing was based on the certification of the Board of Election results of the primary ballot. But the contract simply states that it's a discretionary bonus for a primary win and or a general election win. So the amount was still, as by virtue of it being discretionary, in theory at least, the amount was still could have been calculated differently based on the fact that at that point the campaign knew that it would not have a contested election. By definition, excuse me, there would be less work involved, but the $8,000 was still paid out at that point.
Counsel, could you repeat how you computed that? You gave some computation of 3,800, or just could you go over that again? I want to make sure I understand that.
Could you say that again? I'm sorry.
Sorry, in your presentation, you gave an alternative approach that said if the 8,000 was too much, there is a certain amount would be okay. And I'm just trying to get you to repeat that. I didn't. I want to make sure I have that down.
So what we said is that in the alternative, if the board is to follow the current rule 9-2C Roman 3, it should recognize that the total payments made to Mrs. Carter at the time, $40,200, and the permissible bonus amount of 10% would be $4,020, so that the remaining $3,980, the 25% penalty on that would be $995.
I just want to clarify specifically with regard to future application of the rule, because of course that is a rule that does not apply. It's not binding, at least in this particular case. But the rule is that if the bonus exceeds 10% of the total salary, the entire bonus is impermissible. So going forward, at least, it would not be a situation where it will be parsed in that way, where only the portion that exceeds 10% is impermissible.
Right, although this is Rick Schaefer. I take the argument being that since the rule doesn't apply, we can at least look to it for sort of rough justice as to what would be a reasonable payment, and under those circumstances, roughly cutting the payment in half would, the argument appears to be, would be reasonable.
I agree. I honestly was clarifying for the purpose of anyone who's listening to this and running under the scope of this rule who might misconstrue that interpretation. So for the
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. Is there anything further from either the campaign or the CFP staff? If not, we thank you for your appearance. We're going to hear from one more candidate and then we'll go into deliberations, and after deliberations we'll announce our result. Thank you very much. Ms. Crowley, you are now up, and Ms. Persky, are you appearing in this one as well?
No, that will be my colleague, Jason Yee.
Okay, Jason, you want to get on? There you are. Okay, very good. So I take it, Ms. Crowley, you've been listening in, so you know the drill. The representative of the CFP will make just a brief statement teeing up the issue, and then the floor will be yours, and we'll have some back and forth and so on. So, Jason, why don't you start off?
Mr. Yee, you're muted still.
Yes, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, now.
Okay, my apologies. The little bar wasn't showing up. Good morning, Chair Schaefer, Executive Director Lopres, members of the board, and Ms. Crowley. My name is Jason Yee, Associate Counsel for the CFP. Before the board is the matter of the Elizabeth Crowley campaign in the 2020 election for Queensborough President. Ms. Crowley was a participant in the program. CFP staff recommends that the board deny the Crowley 2028 campaign's Rule 709 petition for reconsideration of the June 18th, 2020 payment determination.
Okay, Ms. Crowley, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Chair Schaefer. Good morning, Executive Director Lopres, the entire board, and the staff at CFP. I want to thank you for the good work that you do on behalf of good, clean elections. And I especially want to compliment you on the work that you've done during this unusual pandemic election season. I'd like to first address Jason Yee's, your council's concerns regarding the last public funds disbursement. And I'd also like to express some of the difficulties that the campaign had experienced with varying degrees of changes that happened during the course of the election cycle. The campaign participated and was grateful to participate and had the goal of maximizing the amount of public funds so that we could get our message out to as many voters. And in looking back at the whole campaign, we did see partly the work of New York City Votes in partnership with the CFP and the Board of Elections, and also the campaigns, a record number of voters coming out to vote in this election, which was really remarkable. But first, I decided to run for Queensborough president back in 2018 when I knew the current president was term limited. I registered and started raising what was then the limit of $3,950. And then November 2018, the voters voted on changes that were to be implemented in 2021. However, a few weeks later, New York City Council voted to change that implementation and then to speed up the process for the special elections that were happening in 2019, thereby changing the contribution limits potentially for participants in this greater matching funds match. 8-to-1 rather than 6-to-1, which was the first time I saw the change in what was then the contribution limit. So then the third time there was a change was when the current borough president was elected to become the district attorney, and then she took office and a special election was to be had, which then for a third time changed the amount of which you could receive public funds. And all the while I was back and forth every time I did a filing with the CFB, doing reimbursements as per their suggestions and always doing my best to follow the rules in a timely way. All in all, we reimbursed close to $200,000. And then when the special election was pushed to June 23rd, so being the fourth time that the contribution limit changed, and an increase of 50% was allowed. So then I went back and chased all these contributors for the extra 50%. And then a few weeks later, the Campaign Finance Board reacted to the governor's cancellation of a special election. Mind you, something that happened that was very, I think, had a disparate impact on the campaign during that time was the changing of the limit. At one point, the CFB said, since the special election was postponed, we're going to allow you to spend 50% more and raise 50% more and increase matching funds by 50%. And then a few weeks later, the governor cancels the special election and puts back on just a primary. And then the CFB determines all the spending that was spent for the special election should be in furtherance of the primary. However, my campaign was very prepared and had a lot of low-dollar contributors who were matched prior to March 16th's cancellation. So at that point in time, I had already qualified for $1 million in matching funds, and most of which were already spent, and most of which were spent on Democrats, but a very large portion of that, 30% at least, was spent on contacting non-Democratic voters. Fast forward to where we are today and where the campaign has been. Because I was so prepared so early and spent so much money before March, from March to June, I was limited to a very small amount of what I could raise and spend. And we did our best to preserve every last dollar to make sure we could be out there getting as many votes in the ways that we could during this pandemic. So what I wanted to do is just share that experience, and I felt that it was hurtful in a way to the campaign with all the changes, and then that because I was such a prepared candidate and ready to almost max out in March and spend nearly $1.5 million of the 1.64 allowed, ultimately the campaign was at a disadvantage come June because most of the opponents that were in the race did not have that fundraising advantage early on and did not spend that money early on. And when you're out there spending the bulk of your money on TV ads and mail that have a specific election date, and you have a plan that you're going to spend that money 4 weeks before the election day, then the election day changes. It is a clear disadvantage. And it's hard to determine just how much that was, but the campaign said it was at least $300,000 in a letter. And so that is just so the board knows that. However, the amount of public matching funds never changed. So I believe that that was a disadvantage to the campaign. And I do think that the initial response to the special elections postponement, increasing matching funds by 50%, was probably the fairer way for the CFB to go. But that being said, as mentioned before, the 5 or 6 times that the spending limit changed, it changed then one more time in May from what was changed in April. So all the while I chase new checks. I say, this is the amount you could give. Then they give another amount. I have to go to the bank, get bank checks cut every time I notice a contribution that's over the limit, I then can't tell you how much time the campaign spent with these bank checks being created at the bank, especially with limited staff. But at the end of the day, we've always been forthright, honest, and responsive to the CFP's requests. And these checks were cut before Election Day. And as soon as we were notified by the CFP that we had 3 contributions totaling $1,400 that were over the limit, we went to the bank and made sure those checks were drawn up and sent back to the contributors. And we responded to the June 18th determination before the July 6th deadline, stating that we had entered these transactions into the C-Smart program and that we were in compliance. So while it's only $1,400, the campaign does have outstanding debt of about $4,000 or $5,000, and we could use the $1,400. And the campaign is still spending money. I'm trying not to spend money, but they're still counting 85,000 votes potentially at the Board of Elections from absentee ballot holders. So that's my response to Mr. Yee's statement as to why the campaign should be denied. I implore you to reconsider and for the board to determine that it would be fair that the campaign receives the last remaining $1,400 in matchable funds. Thank you.
I'd like to say something before Jason responds. Much of what you said is interesting and important, but not perhaps directly relevant to the $1,400 issue. But I do think it's fair to say that we hear you. You got caught in the campaign equivalent of a perfect storm. You'll recall from the book and movie there were 3 different storm centers that came together in that terrible incident, and you've detailed 4 storm centers that came together, obviously all beyond your and our control. As we struggled with this issue and considered the advisory opinion that in effect you're complaining about, it was clear that no matter what we did, somebody was going to be disadvantaged. We struggled really quite assiduously to come up with what we thought was the fair solution. And obviously, anybody who was going to be disadvantaged by the solution we came up with, to them it was going to appear unfair, and perhaps it was. But we did the best we could under dealing with the very same circumstances that you were dealing with. But I want you to know that we at least I hear you loud and clear, and appreciate the difficulties that you encountered in this really unprecedented situation.
Thank you, Chair. I do believe everything that you're saying, and I respect the work that you do and the board does. And so that's why I just wanted to share my experience so that I could. And while $1,400 doesn't have to do so much with all of that's happened, whether my campaign was disadvantaged or not, I do at the end of the day know that your board and the staff there at New York City Campaign Finance Board do all that they can to make sure that fairness and equality is represented in decisions or in their work. And it's overall my many, many years of running for office and participating in your programs, I feel I still have a very high opinion of the work that you do.
Thank you. Jason, did you want to respond at all?
Thank you. So I really only have one point to bring up, which is that Ms. Crowley talks about the timely refunds of the contributions, the contribution overages, excuse me. Why whether or not that is the case, those timely refunds would be a matter for the post-election audit and enforcement process. They wouldn't apply to kind of retroactive eligibility for this payment date. So that's, it's really not what's at issue here for the petition and payment determination.
Rick, you're muted.
All right, does anybody else have any further questions or comments they want to make?
I guess I don't know if the board has any questions about the, the fairly complicated issues that Ms. Crowley has brought up about the changing contribution limit. I mean, a lot of that was by operation of law based on the kind of changing circumstances around whether the election was going to be a special election or a primary election held on primary election day. So many of those changes were due to the way the law is written related to delayed elections versus primary elections. And it's unfortunate, as Chair Schaefer mentioned, because it was, quite a changing circumstance, but that, most of those up and down of those contribution limits was related to the operation of law based on what kind of election was anticipated to be held. And again, it was quite unclear for a period of time which kind of election was going to be held on June 23rd, whether it was going to be a delayed special election or a primary election.
Thank you for that. Yes, I think we all do recall that. So if there are no further statements or questions, I think we'll go into deliberations now.
Oh, Chair, I do have one further statement just in response to the Executive Director's statement.
Sure.
When I decided to run in a special election, I always knew I was going to have a primary in June. And when the special election was canceled, it was canceled. And that fundraising account and the activity in that account, in my opinion, should have been canceled, and it was a new election. It then became a primary. And so that's where I think the decision was unfair. Especially
I understood that. I just wanted to explain that.
Right. And then if I could just highlight this last fact, is that when you participate fully, 3 out of the $4 is public. And when you receive the vast majority of the 3 of the $4 before for a different race, and you enter in a new race and therefore disqualified for 90% or, at least 15% of what would be 100% of matching. In other words, I spent 85% before the March 16th date because I could and because it was the rule. And therefore, when June happened, I did not have the ability to get much more in matching funds. I had a separate account for a June primary that I opened up in January. And I also was punished from the Campaign Finance Board because I had to merge those two accounts. And one account I was allowed to spend money for a campaign violation from the 2017 race. When both were merged together, not only am I not right now receiving $1,400, but I also was limited to nearly $4,000 less in matching funds because of that. What I was doing was right and legal according to the law at the time, but then I got penalized because of the merger. And in hindsight, $5,000 or $6,000 is not a lot of money when you're spending $1.8 million on a race. What hurt the most was the matching funds, which is supposed to be there to get the message out about the election. And we couldn't do that in the same way my opponents could because we received the vast majority of that before the March 24th election that was then canceled, which was a special election, which the way I read the law is that should be canceled and a primary should be had. All the while, when I was running with the special election, I had every intention of fundraising and spending for a primary there that was to be held 3 months later. And that's how I just wanted to make sure that I express that, because that is the way I read the law, and that is the way my attorney also read it when he drafted the letter in response to the decisions that were made in the course of these months. Thank you.
Thank you. I definitely think we've got it. All right. So if there's nothing further at this moment, we'll sign off temporarily and go into deliberations, and then we'll be back after deliberations. Thank you very much.
Thank
See you
Have
soon.
a good day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, so the board has deliberated. We have two candidates, one of whom appeared today. So let me lay out what our proposed findings and penalties are, and then we can, I'll make it into a motion and we'll vote on it. So the first candidate is Costa Constantinides, a candidate, 2017 candidate for City Council District number 22. The board proposes to find the following violations and impose the following penalties. One, failing to demonstrate compliance with cash receipts reporting requirements, penalty of $83. Two, failing to document a transaction, penalty of $72. Three, accepting contributions from corporations, limited liability companies, or partnerships, penalty of $250. Four, failing to demonstrate that spending was in furtherance of the campaign, a penalty of $1,375. Five, making impermissible post-election expenditures, penalty of $284, for total penalties of $2,064. And the board also proposes to find that there is no public
Rick, you're
2017 candidate for City Council District 27. The board proposes to find the following violations and
I'm sorry,
impose.
could you just repeat the last, about the public funds, because you were breaking up a little. The recording won't be clear. Could you just repeat that?
So, yes, that there is no, the board finds that there is no requirement to repay any public funds. Next candidate is Rupert. Was that okay now?
Yes.
yes.
Yeah. Next candidate is Rupert Green, 2017 candidate for City Council District number 27. The board proposes to find the following violations and impose the following penalties. One, failing to report transactions, $54. Two, failing to demonstrate compliance with cash receipts reporting and documentation requirements, $268. Three, failing to document transactions, $50. Four, making cash expenditures greater than $100, $4,030. Five, failing to demonstrate that spending was in furtherance of the campaign, $1,614. Six, converting campaign funds to a personal use, $143. Seven, making impermissible post-election expenditures, violation but no penalty, for total penalties of $6,159. In addition, the board will require a public funds repayment of $17,552. For a total penalty plus public funds repayment of $23,711. Could everybody hear that? Because I was getting some feedback on my own computer.
Yes.
It was clear.
Okay, good. All right, so I will move that the board adopt those findings and impose those penalties and repayment obligations. Is there a second for the motion?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? The motion carries. The next item on the agenda is the Rule 7-09 petition by Elizabeth Crowley. I will move to dismiss that petition Is there a second?
Second.
Before we vote, I'll just add that in dismissing the petition, there is, of course, no prejudice with respect to any claims in the audit process that the Crowley campaign might be entitled to additional public funds payments. With that understanding, all those in favor of the motion to dismiss, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? That motion carries. The next item on our agenda is a vote on the primary election payments. Amy, would you explain this to the public?
There are no recommended payments at this time. It should be general election payments for the 2020 general election, but there are no candidates being recommended for payment today.
All right. So with that, I will make the usual final motion to go into an executive session. We will have nothing to report back on, and so the motion also includes a motion to adjourn following the executive session. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you. The public meeting is now over, and I will see the board members in executive session momentarily. Thank you.
Thank you.